In the opening scene, an orchestra is playing at an opera house in front of a large crowd. Armed men enter the hall and take the audience hostage. Then we see a group of undercover CIA agents in a parked van outside, preparing to enter the opera house. They disguise themselves as regular police officers. When they enter, the main character, the protagonist, is on a mission to extract a person in a box-like device. The protagonist successfully retrieves both, but he must go back to the opera theater to take out some bombs. He nearly dies while removing a bomb, but a strange man miraculously saves him. The bullet that the mysterious man shot appears to be moving backward. The protagonist succeeds in getting away, but some men catch him on a railway. The men torture him in an effort to get him to reveal the identities of his friends. But the protagonist refuses, seeing an opportunity that his friend had created. The protagonist takes a suicide pill and ends his life. After that, the protagonist wakes up in a hospital bed and discovers from his boss that the pill was actually a test to see if he was loyal or not. And of course he passed the test. The protagonist wants to resign because of what happened to him and his team, but his boss gives him another task. He urges him to join Tenet, a mysterious organization. Inside a windmill, the protagonist gets ready for his task. After that, he takes a ship and a car to get to a facility. When he arrives, a scientist greets him and informs him about the characteristics of inverted bullets. According to the scientist, when a gun is shot, the bullet's entropy is inverted, which causes it to travel backwards in time rather than forward. He then fires some bullets. The gun is not firing shots, rather, it is catching them. When the protagonist asks about the origin of the bullets, the scientist responds that they are coming from the future. She continues by saying that if a bullet could be inverted, everything in the world might become inverted or reversed, which would be disastrous for the present world. He then traces the bullet's origin to an arms dealer in Mumbai named Sanjay Singh. Singh's home seems to be a challenge for them. A man then introduces himself as Neil. Although Neil and the protagonist have just met, Neil already knows a lot about him. The two of them then bungee jumped upward into Singh's house. The protagonist finds Singh there, where he is talking with his wife. He then threatens Singh with the knowledge of the source of the reversed bullets. Priya, who is Singh's wife, confesses that she is the gun trader and that Singh is just the front face for the company. Priya reveals to him that she is aware of the Tenet, and that Andrei Sater, a Russian businessman, was the buyer of these reversed bullets. She also advises him to contact those who are not in Sater's line of sight. The protagonist and Neil acquire the necessary knowledge, then flee by bungee jumping once more. The protagonist leaves right away for Britain to speak with Sir Michael Crosby. While eating, Crosby informs the protagonist that he can get in touch with Sater through his divorced wife, Catherine Barton, or Kat. Crosby thinks that if the protagonist shows Kat a fake Goya painting that Aripo created, he can approach her. He tells him that Sater checked the false Goya painting and informed her about Aripo. Thus, he was aware of Kat and Aripo's tight friendship. He then gives him the fake Goya painting, and the protagonist then goes to Kat, where Kat consents to discuss the painting with the protagonist. Kat informs him that his husband is using the fake painting that she sold to him at an auction to blackmail her by threatening to throw her in jail. Additionally, Kat informs her about their time spent on a yacht in Vietnam, where Sater offered Kat her freedom in exchange for giving up her chance to ever see her kid again. Kat believes there is no way out of the situation. Soon after, Sater's men enter the restaurant and quickly round up the two. Kat exits through the kitchen. The protagonist tries to catch up with her, but Sater's men are once again surrounding him. The protagonist fights them all and manages to get out of the restaurant, but Kat has already left. The following day he again speaks with Kat, and he asks her where Sater keeps the drawing. Kat informs him that the drawing will be placed in Oslo Airport's Freeport storage facility. Neil pretends to be a rich businessman and successfully checks the security of the storage facility. Neil and the protagonist then make a plan to steal the painting. The idea is that they will pose as wealthy men and go to the storage facility, while Neil's friend crashes an airplane carrying gold bars in their direction. The strategy seems to be working out perfectly as Neil and the protagonist go through the numerous rooms. When they go into the final room, two mysterious men attack them from a device. One of them is going backward in time. While the protagonist battles the man walking backwards, Neil chases the other one. The protagonist attempts to question the mysterious man, shooting him in the right arm, but the man manages to escape. The protagonist sees Priya after what happened in Oslo. She explains that because one of the men is moving backwards, the machine they saw in Oslo was actually an inverting device called a turnstile. Priya also tells him that Sater is getting plutonium. When the protagonist meets Kat again, he lies to her, saying that he found and destroyed the painting. He then asks her to introduce him to her husband. Kat expresses hesitation, but the protagonist provides her with a well-researched alibi. He then drops Kat off at Sater's yacht. Sater then asks about who the man is, and Kat replies by admitting that he is her friend. Later that evening at supper, the protagonist meets Sator, who asks for him to be executed, but when the protagonist shows interest, he grants him a pardon. He then asks Sator to meet him the next morning at 8. The next day, Sator reveals to Kat that after the Oslo incident, the painting was not destroyed. When Sator and Kat show up, the protagonist is on a boat. When the two are sailing, Kat unbuckles Sator's safety harness, and she then dumps him into the water. The protagonist then swims back to Sator and saves his life. Kat then confronts him about his lie to her. She also misunderstands the protagonist's purpose, believing that he is just there to negotiate a weapon deal with Sator. In a secretive statement, the protagonist tells her that Sator has all of their lives in his hands, not just Kat and her sons. Sator then summons him. Before leaving the room, the protagonist gives her a gun to protect herself. The protagonist and Sator have a conversation about plutonium in his room. Sator tells him about his past life, revealing that he grew up in a hidden Soviet city called Stock 12, and that he once saw a box containing a gold bar with a message from the future. After their conversation, Sator leaves and returns to his room, where he punishes Kat for trying to kill him. However, before he can do much harm, his men alert him that a box has arrived outside. The protagonist sees a helicopter drop a metal box onto the yacht. He sees the gold bars when Sator opens the box. When he finds out that one of them is missing and that one of his men has hidden it, he immediately beats the man to death with a gold bar. The protagonist is not aware that Sator's men are watching him. Sator's guard then assaults him and hands him over to Sator. Sator gives him the mission to travel to Tallinn and rob a truck of valuable items. The protagonist then meets with Neil to discuss a highway robbery. On the other hand, Sator takes his wife to a warehouse, where Kat threatens him with the same gun, but Sator knows she won't be able to fire and takes the gun from her ferociously. Then he assaults her. The protagonist and his team surround the vehicle with 4 different trucks, and the protagonist and Neil successfully pull off the heist. They watch a car heading backwards in time on the highway, and the protagonist realizes that the object in the suitcase is not plutonium but rather something else. The car tries to shoot them but misses, and then chases them. It turns out that the man in the car is Sator. Sator points a gun at his wife and threatens the protagonist that he will shoot Kat if he does not give him the object. The protagonist has no other option, so he gives the object to Sator. After getting the object, Sator leaves his wife in the car without its driver. The protagonist goes into the backward car and stops it from crashing with other vehicles. After saving Kat, they then find themselves surrounded by Sator's soldiers. Neil informs the protagonist that his buddies are coming. The soldiers then kidnap the protagonist and Kat and take them to the previously shown warehouse. There is a turnstile inside, and Sator then threatens the protagonist that if he does not give the location of the object, he will kill Kat. The protagonist then tells him that it is inside the glove box of their car. In spite of this, Sator shoots Kat in the stomach. Neil's friends then come and save them. The protagonist is frustrated that Sator seems to know all of their moves and threatens Neil. Neil's friend tells him that Sator knows all of their moves, as he has sent half of his soldiers back in time to save Kat. The protagonist then decides to go through the turnstile with Kat and Neil and travel back to the time of the Oslo event. He receives instructions from his allies on what to do if he is flipped. The effects of temperature are reversed, and he is required to wear an oxygen mask filled with the inverted air. The protagonist goes into the turnstile and inverts himself inside. He then exits the warehouse and sees the world moving in reverse. He arrives at the location of the exchange. Sator then learns that the protagonist had set the object on the white car. After crashing the white car, Sator takes the object. The protagonist then wakes up on a cargo ship, sailing backwards towards Oslo. Here, Neil explains the idea of inversion to both Kat and the protagonist. He then tells Sator's mastermind plan to them, which is to reverse the entropy of the universe, which would cause the entire planet to travel back in time and then destroy the world. They finally arrive in Oslo on the night of the incident, and the protagonist then finds out he has a bullet wound in his right arm. They hear that the plane has already crashed into the building. While wearing police clothes, Neil and the protagonist bring Kat inside. The protagonist goes inside the building and finds out that he was the one whom he himself fought earlier. He then fights himself. We also get to know that while chasing the man, Neil found out about his identity. The protagonist enters the turnstile successfully and signals Neil to move. Neil and Kat also use the turnstile successfully to flip themselves. They all then escape via an ambulance. The protagonist then meets Priya in Oslo. Priya informs him that Sator is assembling an algorithm so that he can enable the inverse entropy of the world. For this, he is finding the 9 objects from the future. The protagonist makes the decision to stop Sator and asks Priya to guarantee that Kat and her son won't get hurt. While on a ship, they are planning a strategy to deal with Sator. Kat then reveals that Sator is suffering from cancer. Then they come up with the connection that Sator wants to take the entire world with him when he commits suicide while on a trip to Vietnam. The protagonist then tells the Tenet about their plan to travel back in time to the day of Kat and Sator's vacation in Vietnam. On that day, the Tenet will visit Sator's hometown while Kat will keep Sator distracted on the yacht. Before going on the mission, the protagonist gives Kat a phone and instructs her to call him if she ever feels unsafe and give him a time and location. Tenet divides into two groups, Red Team and Blue Team. The Red Team will consist of soldiers moving in regular time, while the Blue Team will consist of inverted soldiers. The idea is that both teams will enter the battlefield at the same time. The protagonist and the Red Team's captain will leave their group and take control of the algorithm. On the mission day, Kat travels to Vietnam and convinces Sator that she is her old self. As both regular and inverted forces attack Stock 12, a huge battle breaks out. After passing a tripwire inside the underground complex, but the entrance is blocked as they do so. On the opposite side of the door, they see a dead Blue Team soldier on the ground. They struggle to open the door. Outside, they see one of Sator's men managing the algorithm. Neil tries to alert the protagonist about the tripwire while he is inverted. Despite taking out and re-inverting his inversion a few times, he repeatedly fails to warn them. The protagonist then talks to Sator and tries to convince him, but he refuses to change his mind. The dead blue soldier on the ground suddenly comes to life and then flees in reverse, preventing the henchman from killing the protagonist. The protagonist then attacks the henchman and defeats him. He also manages to secure the algorithm. Meanwhile, Kat shoots Sator in Vietnam and kills him. She then jumps into the water and boards a boat to leave. On the other hand, the three men have successfully secured the algorithm. In order to prevent anyone from finding the object, they initially decide to divide it between themselves and kill each other. But Neil gives his object to the protagonist. He further reveals that the protagonist was the one who recruited him out to join the Tenet in the future. He explains that although this hasn't happened yet, they have actually known each other for a long time. As he is about to leave, the protagonist sees that Neil's backpack is identical to the inverted dead blue soldier that previously saved his life. When the protagonist asks him if things will change in the future, Neil says that what has happened. Back in Britain, as Kat knows so much about the Tenet, Priya tries to kill her, but Kat calls the protagonist with her precise location and time, and he shows up and kills Priya instead. The protagonist then reveals that he is the mastermind behind the Tenet, and the movie ends. For more movie recaps like this, subscribe and turn the notifications on. Share your favorite moment of this movie in the comments. Thanks for watching. Till then, watch how this man avenges his girlfriend's murder. See you there. Goodbye.